So the HOA called the cops on me for parking in my own driveway. I walked outside thinking it was some kind of joke, until I saw 2 squad cars, flashing lights, and a very confused rookie officer asking for me. See, what the HOA didn't realize is that I am the sheriff. And by the time they found out, it was already too late. This isn't just a story about bad neighbors. It's about power, pride, and how one HOA learned the hard way: never mess with the law when the law owns the land. I'd just come home after a 12-hour shift at the county sheriff's department, the kind of day that drains every ounce of energy you've got. My boots were dusty, my radio was still clipped to my belt, and all I wanted was a quiet evening, a hot dinner, a cold drink, and maybe a few minutes sitting on the porch watching the sun dip behind the hills. My patrol truck, a clean silver F-250 with the county sheriff insignia on the doors, was both my work vehicle and my pride. I always kept it spotless, not just because it represented the department, but because it represented me. Respect for the uniform didn't stop when I clocked out. So, as usual, I parked right where I always did, at the top of my driveway, next to the flower bed I'd planted myself. It was my house, my land, my driveway. Nothing unusual about that, or so I thought. I hadn't even made it to my front porch when I heard the sharp, unmistakable sound of heels clicking on pavement. Click, click, click. The rhythm was fast and angry, the kind of stomp you hear from someone who's been rehearsing their outrage all day. Then came the voice. Shrill, commanding, and dripping with entitlement. "Excuse me, sir. You can't park that here." I turned around slowly, already knowing this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. There she was, a woman in her mid-50s, clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon. Her hair was so tightly pulled back it looked painful, and her name tag read Karen, HOA President. She marched right up to the edge of my property line, chin lifted like she was addressing a criminal. "You can't park commercial vehicles in this neighborhood," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "You're violating HOA Regulation 6A, absolutely no work-related or official vehicles in driveways. They must be stored in garages or off-site." I stared at her for a moment, trying to decide if she was joking. "Ma'am," I said evenly, "this is my driveway. I live here. And that's my patrol truck." Karen crossed her arms, unimpressed. "That may be, but rules are rules. The HOA exists to keep this community looking professional. You can't just bring your work home like this. It sets a bad example." I almost laughed. After spending half my day breaking up domestic disputes, chasing down a runaway suspect, and dealing with people who actually broke laws, now I was being lectured about community appearance because I parked my truck where I pay taxes to park. "Ma'am," I said, doing my best to stay polite, "this house isn't under your HOA." That stopped her for a second, just a second, before she recovered with that smug smirk every HOA tyrant seems to practice in the mirror. "That's what everyone says before they get fined," she replied. "But don't worry. I'll make sure you receive your notice properly. We can resolve this the official way." I blinked. "You're threatening to fine a county sheriff for parking in his own driveway?" She didn't even flinch. "You may be a sheriff somewhere else, but here, you're in my neighborhood. And everyone follows the rules." Now, under normal circumstances, I'd have laughed, maybe walked away. But there was something about the way she said my neighborhood that didn't sit right. It wasn't community pride, it was ownership. Control. That was the kind of attitude that turned quiet neighborhoods into battle zones. Still, I kept my tone measured. "Karen, is it? Look, I'm not trying to start anything. But my house isn't listed under your HOA. It's outside your jurisdiction." Her eyes narrowed like I'd just challenged her royal decree. "We'll see about that," she said, scribbling something on her clipboard. "If it's in this area, it's under my authority." And just like that, she spun on her heel and marched back toward her house, her little HOA badge gleaming in the evening light. I stood there for a second, shaking my head. I dealt with gang leaders, corrupt officials, even smug city inspectors, but somehow this woman with her clipboard and her blazer managed to be one of the most aggravating people I'd ever met. I brushed it off, went inside, and tried to enjoy my dinner. But the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The next morning, I found out I was right. As I stepped out to grab the paper, I noticed something stuck under my windshield wiper. Bright orange. Bold letters. Violation notice. My jaw tightened. The notice said, Unauthorized vehicle, commercial use, subject to immediate towing and fine. Underneath, scrawled in big cursive letters, see HOA President Karen for further discussion. I couldn't help but chuckle. She'd really gone and done it. Now most people would panic, call a lawyer, move the truck, avoid confrontation. But me? I've spent 20 years dealing with people who think rules only apply to others. Karen had picked the wrong man to bully. I took the notice off, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Then I decided something. I wasn't going to move that truck. Not an inch. Instead, I was going to let her make the next move. Because one thing I've learned as sheriff, people who crave power always hang themselves with their own rope. And sure enough, it didn't take long. By that evening, Karen was back, clipboard in hand, backup in tow. 2 other HOA board members followed behind her, puffed up like security guards at a mall. They stood at the edge of my driveway like they were about to conduct an arrest. Karen raised her voice. "You've been officially warned. If you don't move this vehicle, we'll have no choice but to contact the sheriff's department." I almost laughed again. "Oh, Karen. You really have no idea." I folded my arms and said calmly, "You might want to rethink that." But she didn't. She smirked, turned to her board members, and said, "He'll learn. Everyone learns eventually." And as they walked away, I couldn't help but grin. Because she was about to call the cops on the sheriff himself. The next morning started with birds chirping and coffee brewing, until I saw it. There, taped neatly to my mailbox like a scarlet letter, was another bright orange HOA violation slip. Only this time, it wasn't just a warning. It was an official citation. Big bold letters at the top read, "Notice of violation, HOA Code 6A, vehicle infraction. Failure to comply within 24 hours may result in towing at the owner's expense." I stood there for a moment, letting the absurdity sink in. I was looking at a fake official document from an HOA that didn't even have jurisdiction over my property. Now, I'm not a man who angers easily. Years in law enforcement teach you patience. But standing there, holding that piece of paper, I felt something boil up inside me. It wasn't anger exactly, it was disbelief. Karen had actually doubled down. I looked around and saw her across the street, standing with another board member, watching me like a hawk. She had that smug grin plastered across her face, as if she'd just written a ticket to the president himself. I gave her a small wave, the kind that says, "I see you, and you have no idea what you're doing." Then I went inside, poured myself another cup of coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table. If I was going to handle this, I was going to handle it properly. So, I opened my laptop and pulled up the HOA's so-called community rulebook. It didn't take long to find it. Their website looked like something built in 2008, outdated fonts, flashing clip art banners, and a long PDF titled, Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association Rules and Regulations, Revised Edition. I downloaded it, and within minutes I was reading through pages of fine print, trying not to laugh. Some of the rules included gems like, all lawns must be cut to exactly 2.5 inches in height. All mailboxes must be painted forest green. No exterior holiday decorations may remain up beyond 72 hours after a holiday. No work-related or official vehicles may be parked in residential driveways. That last one, their beloved Rule 6A, was underlined 3 times. But here's what made me chuckle. Halfway down the document, under a section titled Jurisdiction and Enforcement Boundaries, there was a small map outlining which homes the HOA legally governed. My property? It sat about 50 feet beyond that line. I'd bought it that way on purpose. I knew HOAs could be a nightmare. The listing agent had even told me proudly, "This house isn't under HOA control." That's why I chose it, a little slice of peace at the edge of the chaos. So technically, legally, and absolutely, Karen and her clipboard had no authority over me whatsoever. But of course, try telling that to someone whose entire personality depends on being in charge. By mid-morning, I decided to pay Karen a little visit. Nothing aggressive, just a neighborly chat. I walked across the street, violation slip in hand, and knocked on her door. After a few seconds, the door swung open. She stood there in her usual HOA president uniform, navy blazer, pearls, and an expression that screamed, "I run this town." "Yes," she said, arching an eyebrow. I held up the orange paper. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I began calmly. You've issued me multiple HOA violations, but this property isn't part of your association. She gave me that condescending smirk again. That's what people always say when they don't want to follow the rules. But according to my records, every home on this street is included. Your records? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Because according to county zoning maps, your HOA boundary ends 2 houses down. Her smirk faltered for half a second before she quickly recovered. Well, I'm sure you're mistaken. We updated our bylaws last year. I couldn't help but grin. Updated them? You mean you redrew the line yourselves? Karen straightened her posture. We expanded to protect the community's integrity. Ma'am, I said, you can't just redraw legal boundaries because you feel like it. That's not how jurisdiction works. She narrowed her eyes. Oh, I think it's exactly how it works. If your home faces this street, you follow our rules. Period. Now, are you going to move that truck or not? I looked over her shoulder, where one of her board members, a tall man with a clipboard, was pretending to check boxes. I smiled. Karen, you do realize that truck belongs to the county sheriff's department, right? I don't care whose it is, she snapped. If it's parked here, it follows my HOA code. That was it. I couldn't help but laugh. Not mockingly, just genuine disbelief. Well, Karen, I said, you might want to be careful who you call next. Because if you call the sheriff's department to report that truck, guess who's going to answer? She blinked, clearly confused. Who? I pointed at myself. Me. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. She was trying to process it. You could see the gears grinding in her head. But rather than back down, she did what Karens do best, doubled down again. Well, she said with a forced laugh, we'll let law enforcement handle this officially then. Maybe you'll finally learn the meaning of the word compliance. And with that, she slammed the door. I stood there for a moment, shaking my head. Then I laughed all the way back to my driveway. She was actually going to do it. She was going to call the police, on the sheriff. By late afternoon, I had a feeling she'd made the call. 2 black and white county cruisers rolled slowly down the street and stopped right in front of my house. The lights weren't flashing, but the message was clear. This was an official response. I stepped outside, badge on my belt, coffee in hand, and waved. The younger deputy stepped out, eyes wide. Sheriff Davis? I nodded. Morning, boys. I assume you're here about the commercial vehicle complaint? The deputy scratched his neck awkwardly. Yeah, the HOA president called it in. Said someone was illegally parking a patrol vehicle. I smiled, glancing across the street where Karen was peeking through her curtains. Well, I said, she got half that story right. And as the deputies chuckled nervously, I realized the fun was just getting started. Because Karen was about to learn that rules don't beat the law. It didn't take long for things to hit a boiling point. By the following afternoon, I noticed something strange. A few of my neighbors were standing on the sidewalk, whispering and pointing toward my house. Some had their phones out, recording. That's never a good sign. I stepped outside, and there she was, Karen of course, standing at the end of my driveway with 2 other HOA board members. One was a tall, thin man with gray hair and a clipboard, there's always a clipboard, and the other was a younger woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Karen's face was redder than a stop sign. You've ignored multiple notices, she shouted, loud enough for the whole street to hear. You were told to remove this commercial vehicle from the property. I took a deep breath and walked down the driveway, calm as a summer morning. I'd dealt with worse situations, armed standoffs, high-speed chases, even courtroom cross-examinations. But there's something special about an HOA argument. It's not about justice or safety, it's about control. Karen, I said evenly, we've been through this. My home isn't in your HOA. Your rules don't apply here. Her eyes narrowed like a hawk locking onto prey. That's what you think. We've expanded our jurisdiction. I almost laughed. You can't expand jurisdiction, Karen. This isn't Monopoly. You can't just buy another block because you feel like it. Her jaw clenched. You're making a scene. I glanced around at the growing audience of neighbors and raised an eyebrow. Pretty sure you're the one standing in my driveway yelling. Karen looked around, realizing people were filming. You could almost see her trying to regain composure, smoothing her blazer and lowering her voice. "We're only trying to maintain community standards," she said sweetly. "You're setting a bad example for everyone by keeping this." Police truck parked out front. I crossed my arms. It's a patrol vehicle. I drive it every day. And for the record, keeping it visible is actually good for community safety. You'd be surprised how crime rates drop when people know law enforcement lives nearby. The gray-haired man with the clipboard cleared his throat. "We've reviewed your file, sir," he said, glancing at his notes like he was reading from a script. "Every resident in Oakwood Estates must adhere to uniform property appearance codes. That includes you." I smiled politely. "That's funny, because I'm not a resident of Oakwood Estates. I live on 418 Birch Lane, which, last I checked, sits just outside your boundary." Karen snapped, "That's a technicality." I tilted my head. "You mean, the law?" Her lips twitched, and I could tell I'd hit a nerve. Karen hated being challenged, especially by someone who knew how to stay calm while she lost control. Then she said it, the words that made every neighbor gasp. "If you don't move that vehicle by sundown," she declared, "I'm calling the cops." I almost smiled. "Oh, you really shouldn't have said that." I took a step forward, keeping my tone respectful but firm. "Karen, before you do something you're going to regret, maybe you should double-check who you're calling." She scoffed. "Don't threaten me." "Not a threat," I said. "Just advice." She turned on her heel, looked at her board members, and said, "We'll handle this the official way." The tall man scribbled something on his clipboard, and the younger woman whispered, "Maybe we should just let it go, Karen." But Karen ignored her. "Rules are rules," she muttered, storming off. As she marched down the street, I caught the sound of her voice carrying through the air, "He'll learn. Everyone learns." I went back inside, shaking my head. My wife, Lisa, looked up from the kitchen table, concern written all over her face. "Let me guess," she said, sipping her coffee. "Karen again?" "Yep," I said, hanging up my jacket. "And this time, she's calling the cops." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "She's calling you on yourself?" I chuckled. "Pretty much. I give it an hour before dispatch calls my phone." Lisa laughed, then her smile faded. "You're not actually going to do anything, right?" "Nope," I said, sitting beside her. "I'll let this play out. Sometimes the best lesson is the one people teach themselves." Sure enough, not even an hour later, my phone buzzed. I looked down at the caller ID, County Dispatch. I answered. "Sheriff Davis." The dispatcher's voice was hesitant, almost amused. Sheriff, we've got a call from an HOA in Oakwood Estates. Complaint about an unauthorized vehicle parked in a driveway. The caller said it's a silver sheriff's truck." I couldn't help but grin. "Yeah, I think I can handle that one personally." "You want me to send units?" "Sure," I said. "Let's make it official." 15 minutes later, 2 marked patrol cars rolled down the street, lights off, just cruising. The same neighbors who'd been recording earlier were now back outside, whispering and giggling. You could feel the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Karen came running out of her house, waving her arms. "Officers. Over here," she called, pointing dramatically at my truck. "That's the one. He's been violating our community rules for days." The 2 deputies got out, and I stepped outside too, still in my sheriff's jacket. They looked at me, then at her, then back at me. One of them, a rookie named Tyler, tried hard not to smile. Sheriff," he said quietly. I nodded. "Yep. This is the call." Karen looked confused. "Wait, you know him?" The deputy cleared his throat. "Ma'am, that's Sheriff Davis. He's our boss." The silence that followed was priceless. Karen's jaw dropped. Her clipboard slipped slightly in her hands. "What?" she whispered. "I told you before," I said calmly, "you might want to think twice before calling the cops." Her face turned pale. I didn't realize." "Apparently not," I said. "Now, since I'm here, do you want to file a complaint against the county sheriff for parking his own patrol truck in his own driveway?" Karen blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "And no, I just wanted to keep the community tidy. The deputy tried not to laugh. Well, ma'am, the sheriff's vehicle is exempt from HOA rules. In fact, it's legally protected under county code for residential parking. Karen muttered something unintelligible, turned red, and stormed back toward her house without another word. The deputies turned to me, smirking. You want us to file a report? One of them asked. Nah, I said, smiling. Lesson learned. As they drove away, I leaned against my truck and looked across the street. Karen's curtains twitched as she peeked out, mortified. I couldn't help but think, she'd finally met a rule she couldn't enforce. Oh, you'd think after being publicly embarrassed in front of half the neighborhood, and learning that the man she tried to report was the county sheriff, Karen would have taken a hint. But nope. Karen wasn't the kind of person who accepted defeat. She was the kind who thought, if the rules don't work, make new ones. It started the next morning. I woke up to the sound of a camera shutter. At first, I thought maybe it was just a bird tapping on the window. But when I looked outside, there she was, standing in my driveway again, wearing oversized sunglasses, taking photos of my patrol truck from every possible angle like she was auditioning for a detective show. I opened the door and leaned against the frame. Morning, Karen. Beautiful day, huh? She jumped slightly, then puffed herself up. This is documentation, she said sharply. For the record. Record of what? I asked, keeping my tone friendly. She glanced at her phone. Of ongoing rule violations. You might think you're above the HOA, but I'm filing a full report. I rubbed my forehead. Karen, I told you, I'm not part of your HOA. You don't have authority here. Her lips curled into a smirk. We'll see about that. Then she walked off without another word, muttering something about city ordinances and abuse of power. I shook my head, went back inside, and tried to focus on my breakfast. Lisa was already laughing. You're going to end up on some HOA blog, she said, sipping her coffee. Sheriff accused of truck tyranny. Don't jinx it, I said. She's got that look, the one people get right before they do something they can't undo. And sure enough, a few hours later, she did exactly that. Around noon, I was in my garage tinkering with some fishing gear when I heard sirens in the distance. At first, I didn't think much of it. Sirens in town weren't unusual. But as they grew louder, closer, and finally stopped right outside my house, I froze mid-step. No way. I stepped out to see two more patrol cars, lights flashing, and an ambulance parked behind them. My neighbors were already gathering on the sidewalk again, phones out, narrating the chaos like it was a live-streamed drama. And there, waving her arms wildly at the officers, was Karen. She's done it again, Lisa muttered beside me, shaking her head. I walked down the driveway, calm as ever. The senior officer on the scene, Lieutenant Barnes, saw me and immediately looked confused. Sheriff, he said carefully. Dispatch said there was an emergency. Caller reported a dangerous vehicle and a man impersonating law enforcement? I raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, the caller's name wouldn't happen to be Karen, would it? He looked down at his clipboard. Actually, yeah. Karen turned toward us, triumph all over her face. That's him, she shouted. That's the man pretending to be a sheriff to intimidate me. He's been parking his vehicle illegally, refusing to follow community codes, and now he's threatening me. I blinked slowly. Karen, are you accusing me of impersonating myself? She crossed her arms. I'm accusing you of abuse of power. You think because you wear a badge, you can ignore rules everyone else follows. Barnes was trying not to laugh. Ma'am, he said carefully, the man you're speaking to is the sheriff. He's been our commanding officer for 6 years. Karen's expression faltered. No, that can't be. He's just saying that to cover himself. I took out my badge, held it up, and said, Want to call the station and verify? Barnes nodded. Go ahead, ma'am. Here's the direct line. Karen hesitated, took out her phone, and started dialing. She looked determined, like she still believed she could prove everyone wrong. The call lasted about 20 seconds. Then her expression changed, first to confusion, then disbelief, then full-blown horror. You're really the sheriff, she whispered. Last I checked, I said. And I'd appreciate it if you stopped using 911 as your personal complaint hotline. One of the paramedics leaned out of the ambulance, looking bemused. "So no one's hurt?" Barnes shook his head. "Just a bruised ego, I think." Karen's cheeks turned crimson. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she sputtered. "There are rules, and there are laws," I interrupted gently. "One of which says filing false 911 reports is a crime." Her mouth fell open. "You can't arrest me for that." I gave her a look. "Karen, I don't want to arrest anyone. But you've now called 911 twice over a legally parked sheriff's truck. If you keep this up, I'll have to file a harassment report." You could almost see the realization hit her, that she'd picked a fight she couldn't possibly win. The crowd was still filming, whispering things like she really called 911 on the sheriff, and she's done for this time. Karen mumbled something under her breath and stormed back toward her house, tripping slightly on the curb. Barnes turned to me, still half smiling. "You want me to log this one, sir?" "Yeah," I said, sighing. "Better have it on record in case she escalates again." As the officers packed up and left, I could feel every neighbor's eyes on me. A few gave subtle nods of respect. Others just grinned. Lisa came out, shaking her head. "You know she's not done, right?" "Oh, I know," I said, looking toward Karen's house. "But she's running out of options." Lisa crossed her arms. "You're enjoying this a little too much." I smirked. "Maybe just a little. It's not every day someone calls 911 on the sheriff." That night, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset over the quiet cul-de-sac. Everything was peaceful again, for now. But I could see Karen's curtains twitching from across the street. She wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. After the whole 911 on the sheriff incident, I figured that would be the end of it. Most people, after realizing they just humiliated themselves in front of half the neighborhood and 3 police units, would have retreated quietly into their homes and stayed there for a good long while. But not Karen. Karen didn't retreat. She regrouped. A week went by with no incidents. My patrol truck sat proudly in the driveway every day, gleaming in the sun, almost like a silent declaration: "This is my land, my rules." The neighborhood had settled down too. A few neighbors even came by to say they were glad someone had finally stood up to her. Apparently, Karen had been queen of the cul-de-sac for years, bullying people about mailbox colors, lawn ornaments, and whether or not their kids could play basketball in their driveways. I was starting to think maybe she'd finally realized she was outmatched. Until I checked my mail one morning. There it was, a crisp, official-looking envelope with the HOA logo stamped across the top. HOA board notice, formal complaint filed against you. I almost laughed. "Of course," I muttered. Lisa came over to see what it was about. Please tell me she didn't. I tore the envelope open. Inside was a typed letter that could only have been written by someone with way too much time and way too little self-awareness. "Dear homeowner, the HOA has received multiple reports regarding your conduct and non-compliance with community regulations. Additionally, we have been made aware of your alleged intimidation of board members and misuse of law enforcement authority. As a result, the HOA has decided to escalate this matter to the County Code Enforcement Office for review." At the bottom, in neat cursive, it was signed, "Sincerely, HOA President, Karen Fletcher." Lisa read it over my shoulder and whistled. "She's going after your job now?" "Looks like it," I said, trying to stay calm. "She can't find me, so she's trying to hit where she thinks it'll hurt." And sure enough, 2 days later, I got a call from my own office. "Sheriff," said my deputy, sounding hesitant, "you're not gonna believe this. We got a formal complaint filed with the county inspector's office accusing you of abusing your authority to harass private citizens." I had to set the phone down for a second and just laugh. "Let me guess, name on the complaint starts with K?" He chuckled awkwardly. "You'd be correct, sir." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Don't worry about it. Let the inspector handle it. I'll cooperate fully." And I did. When the county inspector showed up at my property the next day, he looked both amused and embarrassed. "Sheriff," he said, "I'm only here because I have to be. Got a dozen emails from your HOA president claiming you're using your patrol vehicle to intimidate her and violate neighborhood standards." "By parking it?" I asked. He grinned. "That's what I said." I walked him around the property, showed him everything: the truck, the garage, the boundaries that clearly marked where HOA jurisdiction ended. He checked everything off his list, then said, "Well, you're completely in the clear. I'll file the report and close it today." "Appreciate that," I said, shaking his hand. "And if you ever need help with HOA drama, I'll send a deputy." He laughed and left. But of course, Karen wasn't satisfied. That evening, I heard her outside again, talking loudly to a small group of neighbors, probably the HOA board members she'd recruited. "This isn't over," she said, her voice carrying down the street. "He's using his badge to bully this community. I've already sent an email to the state attorney's office." I had to bite my tongue not to walk over right then and end it. Instead, I just stayed inside, listening through the window as her conspiracy theories got wilder. She was saying things like, he forged property lines to get out of HOA control, and he's got the sheriff's department covering for him. Lisa looked at me, eyes wide. "She's unhinged." "Yeah," I sighed, "but the more she talks, the more rope she gives herself." And I was right again. 2 days later, she made her biggest mistake yet. Apparently, she'd emailed not just the state attorney's office, but the county board of supervisors, claiming the sheriff's department had been knowingly interfering in HOA operations. Problem was, when you make false claims to a public office, it becomes a matter of record. Within hours, the board forwarded the complaint directly to me, as the county sheriff in charge of reviewing local harassment reports. That's right. Karen's complaint landed right back on my desk. I couldn't help it. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Lisa came into my office, concerned, until she saw what I was holding. "No way," she said, covering her mouth. "Oh yes way," I said. "Karen just filed an official complaint to the sheriff's office, addressed to the sheriff himself." I signed the bottom of the form, marking it as reviewed. Then, following procedure, I issued a formal response. Case status: closed. Reason: accusation unfounded. Notes: complaint filed against the department's own sheriff. Matter dismissed with prejudice. It was the most satisfying paperwork I'd ever filled out. The next morning, I delivered a copy of the report straight to Karen's mailbox, professionally sealed and stamped. Within the hour, her blinds were fluttering, her front door cracked open, and she appeared on her porch, holding the envelope like it was radioactive. She opened it, scanned the page, and went pale. Her hands trembled. She looked across the street at me, standing there, sipping coffee, calm as could be, and for once, she didn't have anything to say. That was the first time I ever saw Karen speechless. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over yet. Because people like Karen didn't quit when they were wrong, they just got sneakier. And sure enough, the next step she took would turn this quiet neighborhood feud into a full-blown war. After the complaint fiasco blew up in her face, most sane people would have thrown in the towel. But as I was starting to learn, Karen wasn't most people. She didn't back down, she doubled down. For about a week, the neighborhood went quiet again. No more photos of my truck, no angry notes, no HOA violation papers stuck under my windshield. Even Lisa said, maybe she finally learned her lesson. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But something about the silence felt wrong. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat, she was the type to plot revenge in secret. And that's exactly what she was doing. The Whisper Network, it started with whispers, literally. I noticed Karen standing at the mailbox one morning, talking in hushed tones with two of her usual HOA sidekicks, Marlene and George. They were glancing toward my house between sentences, shaking their heads dramatically like they were discussing a neighborhood emergency. Later that evening, Lisa came in from walking our dog and said, "You're not gonna like this. Karen's handing out flyers." "Flyers?" I asked. "About what?" Lisa handed me one. It was printed on cheap yellow paper, full of bold red text that read, "Special HOA Board Meeting, Private Session Discussion of Community Safety, Vehicle Regulations, and Authority over Shared Property Lines. Attendance restricted to HOA members only." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Shared property lines? That's you." I sighed. "Of course it is." She grinned. "You going to crash it?" "Not yet," I said. "Let's see what she's cooking up first." Operation New Rules turns out. Karen had called a special emergency session of the HOA board to propose a new set of regulations that conveniently targeted me without ever mentioning my name. One of my neighbors, Jim, who was also fed up with her nonsense, gave me the scoop later that night. He'd recorded part of the meeting on his phone, nothing illegal, just audio from his own front yard, since they'd gathered outside in Karen's driveway. I listened to it later while sipping coffee. Karen's voice came through loud and clear. We can't let that man set a precedent. If he's allowed to park his vehicle, then soon everyone will. We'll have plumbers, electricians, even tow trucks cluttering the streets. This is our community, and we will not let outsiders ruin it. Outsider, I muttered, shaking my head. I lived closer to the main road than any of them. Then another voice chimed in, probably Marlene, but Karen, he said he's not under the HOA's jurisdiction. Karen snapped, that's what he claims. But the county maps are confusing. If we amend our charter to expand the appearance boundary, we can technically enforce our rules up to the next property marker. That includes his driveway. I nearly choked on my coffee. She's trying to redraw the HOA borders? Jim nodded. She's insane, man. She even passed around a vote sheet. Wants to call it the Community Appearance Zone. I laughed. Oh, she's really digging herself deep this time. The uninvited guest a few nights later, the HOA held the official vote, another private meeting in Karen's living room. But what Karen didn't realize was that, according to county law, any public vote that affects non-member property lines has to be accessible for public record. Translation: she couldn't legally exclude me. So, of course, I decided to pay a little visit. I walked up to her front door just as she was starting her speech. The chatter inside went dead silent when I knocked, loud and deliberate. After a few seconds, the door creaked open. Karen's face appeared, pale but determined. "Sheriff," she said flatly, "this is a private HOA meeting." "Actually," I said, holding up a printout of the county housing statute, "if you're discussing boundary amendments, it's public record. I'm here as a citizen, and if needed, as the sheriff overseeing municipal code compliance." She blinked. You can't just barge in here." I smiled. "You can try to stop me, but that would be interference with a public proceeding. You really want to go down that road?" The room behind her was full of neighbors, some trying to hide their smiles, others wide-eyed. Clearly, they weren't expecting this. Reluctantly, Karen stepped aside. "Fine. Sit quietly. You're outnumbered anyway." I took a seat at the back and folded my arms. She cleared her throat and began her presentation again. "As I was saying, this new regulation is about preserving our community's values." "Karen," I interrupted gently, "is this the part where you try to redraw HOA jurisdiction to include land that doesn't belong to you?" Her face turned red. "That's not what I'm doing." "Oh," I said, holding up a county map. "Because the community appearance zone you've drawn here covers property owned by both private citizens and the county, including the sheriff's right-of-way access road." Murmurs rippled through the room. George, one of her board members, looked uneasy. "Wait, that's county land?" "Yes," I said. "Which means if you vote to include it, you're essentially trying to claim government property under a homeowners association. That's a felony." The room went dead silent. You could hear the sound of her clipboard trembling in her hands. Karen stammered, that wasn't my intention." "Maybe not," I said calmly, standing. "But I'd recommend canceling this meeting before someone takes your intentions the wrong way." And with that, I tipped my hat and walked out. Behind me, voices erupted, neighbors arguing, someone saying she's gone too far this time, another muttering we're not voting on that. By the next morning, half the neighborhood had resigned from the HOA board, and Karen's so-called community appearance zone had been scrapped before it even started. That night, as Lisa and I sat on the porch, she handed me a beer and said, "You know, you're probably the only sheriff who's ever taken down an HOA by just showing up to a meeting." I laughed. "She's not done yet. She'll regroup again. People like Karen always do." And sure enough, by the weekend, a fresh letter appeared in my mailbox. But this time, it wasn't from the HOA. It was from the County Property Management Office. Karen had officially filed a request to have my driveway rezoned as shared community access. She wasn't just playing games anymore, she was going for ownership. If there was one thing I'd learned about Karen by now, it was that logic didn't stop her, it only fueled her determination. Every time she lost, she didn't retreat. She reloaded. So when I pulled that latest envelope out of my mailbox, stamped with the County Property Management Office seal, I knew it wasn't just junk mail. Inside was a formal notice titled, Request for Boundary Review and Rezoning Evaluation filed by HOA President Karen Fletcher. I skimmed the pages, my jaw tightening. She'd done it again. Karen was now trying to rezone my driveway, claiming that a portion of it was technically part of the shared access lane used by the HOA. Lisa leaned over my shoulder, reading it too. She's trying to say your driveway is public property? Not exactly, I said, shaking my head. She's trying to say it's hers. Lisa sighed, rubbing her temples. You've got to be kidding me. Nope, I said, smirking. This time, she just picked a fight with the wrong department. Calling in the surveyors, the county property office doesn't play around with zoning disputes, especially when one of the parties happens to be the sheriff. Within 2 days, a team of county surveyors arrived in bright orange vests, clipboards in hand, ready to measure every inch of the property lines. Karen came out to supervise, of course. She was dressed like she was attending a courtroom hearing, navy suit, oversized sunglasses, a binder full of highlighted regulations. She greeted the surveyors like she owned the place. Thank you for coming. I'm glad someone's finally addressing the boundaries issue. We've had unauthorized vehicles parking partially on HOA land for weeks. I was standing at the edge of my porch, sipping coffee, watching the whole show unfold. The lead surveyor, a tall guy named Mitch, turned to me. Sheriff, you okay if we take a few measurements along your driveway? Go right ahead, I said. You'll find the original corner markers under the soil line, about 12 inches deep. My dad and I set them when we built the fence. They're still registered with the county. Karen blinked. That can't be right. The HOA map shows. Mitch cut her off politely. Ma'am, HOA maps aren't official land records. We use county deeds. She frowned but said nothing. For the next hour, they walked the property, checking markers, GPS coordinates, and legal descriptions from the county plat book. Karen followed them like a hawk, muttering under her breath every time they measured something that didn't go her way. Finally, Mitch and his crew packed up their gear. All done, he said. Karen rushed forward. Well, what did you find? Mitch looked at his tablet, then back at her. According to county records, the driveway, fence, and access lane are entirely on Sheriff Daniels' property. In fact, he hesitated, glancing between us. It looks like part of your back patio, Mrs. Fletcher, actually extends 2 feet over the boundary line onto his parcel. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen blinked, confused. That's impossible. My property has been the same since it was built. Mitch nodded sympathetically. It's possible the developer made a minor error when setting the foundation. Happens sometimes. But technically, that section of your patio, and part of your garden wall, are encroaching on county land. I couldn't resist. Guess we both learned something new today. Karen's face went pale. You can't mean, are you saying I'm trespassing? Mitch shrugged. I wouldn't use that word, ma'am, but you'll need to apply for an encroachment permit or move the structure. Lisa, who had been quietly filming the exchange from our porch, nearly dropped her phone laughing. Karen sputtered, This is outrageous. My home's been here 15 years. Mitch smiled politely. And the property lines have been here 50. I'll file the report today. Have a good afternoon. With that, the county team drove off, leaving Karen standing in her driveway, gripping her binder like a lifeline. The aftermath within hours, the news spread across the neighborhood. The mighty HOA president who tried to rezone the sheriff's land had just discovered her own property was built over someone else's. Neighbors who once whispered about siding with her were now keeping their distance. A few even came by to shake my hand and say, she finally got what was coming. One of them, Jim, the guy who'd recorded the secret meeting, grinned ear to ear. So, Sheriff, what are you gonna do? Charge her rent for the patio? Lisa smirked. Don't tempt him. I chuckled. No. I'm not gonna push it. The county'll handle it. I've got enough entertainment for the week. Still, it felt good knowing the truth was on record, and official. For once, I didn't need to lift a finger. Karen had taken care of her own downfall. Karen's meltdown, of course. Karen didn't take it gracefully. That evening, she stormed across the street, clutching a stack of papers, and demanded to speak privately. Karen, I said calmly, unless this is about a crime, this conversation isn't official business. She huffed. You set me up. I raised an eyebrow. By owning my land? You knew those markers were there, she snapped. I did, I said. That's called being informed. She glared at me, shaking. You think you've won, but I'm going to appeal this. I'll take it to the county board, the state, the governor if I have to. Be my guest, I said. But while you're at it, you might want to start the paperwork for that encroachment permit. The county gave you 30 days. Her jaw dropped. You can't, not me, I said with a smile. The county. She stomped back to her house, muttering every insult in the book, while neighbors peeked out their windows trying not to laugh. That night, as Lisa and I sat outside again, she handed me another beer and said, You realize this started over you parking in your own driveway? I laughed. Yeah. Imagine how bad it'll get when she finds out what's next. Lisa looked over. What is next? I smirked. Let's just say Karen's going to learn who really owns this neighborhood. Because what Karen didn't know, what she'd soon find out, was that the HOA's land lease itself had been transferred, and their new landlord was me. A week passed after the property line fiasco, and I thought things might finally quiet down. But if I'd learned anything from my years in law enforcement, and from living next to Karen, it's that peace never lasts long. I was halfway through my morning coffee when I heard the unmistakable sound of her voice again, echoing from across the street. She was holding court on her porch, barking orders to her fellow HOA board members. Listen, we can't let this sheriff think he can undermine the HOA's authority. We'll find another way. If we control the roads, we control him. I chuckled under my breath. Control the roads? Lady, you're about to get a lesson in what ownership really means. Because 2 days before that little speech, I'd gotten a call from an old buddy, Rick, who worked in the county's land registry division. He was the one who'd signed off on the boundary survey, and he sounded amused. Hey, Sheriff Daniels, he'd said, you might want to sit down for this one. I frowned. Rick, what is it? You remember that parcel of land your house sits on? Turns out the deed you bought includes more than just your lot. You own about 12 additional acres, mostly forest and hillside. I blinked. 12 acres? That's not what I was told when I bought it. Yeah, well, Rick continued, flipping through digital files, the original land division from 1987 wasn't filed correctly. The HOA that formed later built their community facilities, clubhouse, pool, and half their main road, on land still technically belonging to that original parcel. You, my friend, just bought that parcel. I sat there in stunned silence for a few seconds. Wait, I said slowly, you're telling me the HOA's roads and amenities are sitting on my property? Rick laughed. Legally? Yeah. They've been using it for decades under an expired easement that was never renewed. You own the land they're standing on. Technically, they're your tenants. I had to bite back a laugh. Rick, you're kidding. Not a bit, he said. I can send you the updated maps and documents. You might want to keep them handy. Something tells me that HOA president isn't gonna like this one bit. He was right. And I couldn't wait to see her face. The meeting 3 days later, I got an official notice hand-delivered to my mailbox. HOA emergency board meeting. Attendance required. Required. That word alone made me laugh out loud. I wasn't a member of their HOA, but curiosity got the better of me. So that evening, I strolled over to their fancy little clubhouse, the same one I now legally owned. When I walked in, the room went quiet. Karen sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by half a dozen board members who looked about as uncomfortable as cats in a bathtub. She forced a smile that could have cracked glass. Sheriff Daniels, she said sweetly, thank you for coming. We wanted to clear up some confusion about property boundaries. I leaned against the doorframe. Oh, I think the county already did that for us. A couple of the board members shifted uneasily. One of them, a nervous-looking man with gray hair, whispered, Karen, maybe we should just… Karen silenced him with a glare. No. We will not bow to intimidation. Sheriff or not, he's still subject to HOA rules when he steps on community property. I raised an eyebrow. Community property, huh? That's an interesting term. She smirked. Yes. The clubhouse, the pool, the playground, all belong to the HOA, and therefore, we have jurisdiction over all activities conducted here. Which means your vehicles, your guests, and your— I interrupted her mid-sentence. Actually, about that. You might want to take a look at these. I laid a thick folder of printed documents on the table, certified by the county land office, stamped and signed. Karen frowned and flipped through the pages. As she read, her confident smile started to fade. Her voice trembled slightly. What is this? That, I said, is the updated property record for parcel 21B47. My property. According to the county, it extends to here. I gestured around the room. In other words, this clubhouse, and about half your amenities, sit on my land. You could have heard a pin drop. The nervous board member muttered, "He owns the land?" Karen's face turned red. That's impossible. The HOA has been using this property for 15 years. I nodded. On a lease that expired in 2009. Never renewed. The developer forgot to file it before dissolving the company. So technically, you've all been using my property rent-free for over a decade. The man next to her let out a low whistle. Oh my God, Karen slammed the folder shut. You can't do this. You can't just show up and claim. I said with a grin. Karen, I'm not claiming anything. I'm just showing you county documentation. You can call them yourself, or better yet, ask your attorney. She looked ready to explode. So what now? You gonna evict the HOA? I shrugged. No. I'm not cruel. But since you all like enforcing rules so much, I thought I'd start enforcing mine. The twist of power that's when I handed her a simple piece of paper, a notice of land use agreement. It stated, in plain English, as of this date, the HOA must obtain written permission from the property owner, Sheriff Mark Daniels, for continued use of the land and facilities located on parcel 21B47. Annual rent, $1 per year, conditional upon cessation of all harassment or interference toward the property owner and his household. Karen blinked. $1. I smiled. $1. Think of it as symbolic. I'm not after your money. I just want you to understand how it feels when someone waves paperwork in your face and says, rules are rules. The board members were trying not to laugh. Even the ones who used to support her were barely holding it together. Karen stood up, shaking with rage. You're mocking the HOA. Not mocking, I said calmly. Just leveling the playing field. The aftermath word spread fast, faster than wildfire. By the next morning, half the neighborhood knew that the sheriff now owned the land under the HOA's most prized facilities. Some neighbors came over to shake my hand. Others brought pie. One even offered to mow my lawn as a thank you for saving us from Karen. Meanwhile, Karen's control crumbled. Board members began resigning. The HOA's lawyer quietly advised them to sign my lease agreement, before things got worse. By the end of the week, they'd done just that. And Karen? She refused to sign. She stormed off, yelling that she'd never pay rent to the sheriff. Lisa smirked. She'll come around. I nodded. She will, when she realizes I also own the road leading to her house. Lisa laughed. Oh, this is gonna be fun. If there's one thing I've learned in 20 years wearing a badge, it's that stubborn people never admit defeat, they just dig the hole deeper. And that's exactly what Karen did. Even after I offered her the most generous deal imaginable, $1 rent and a clean slate, she flat out refused to sign the agreement. She called it extortion, intimidation, and an abuse of authority. Funny words, coming from the woman who tried to fine me for parking in my own driveway. The HOA meltdown a week after the meeting, the HOA looked more like a sinking ship than a governing body. Half the board members had resigned. The treasurer publicly quit during a Zoom call, muttering, "I'm not going down with this mess." The secretary started forwarding all HOA complaints to my office with a note, "Maybe the sheriff can handle it." Meanwhile, Karen doubled down. She started sending out emergency bulletins to residents, warning them that I was attempting to seize control of the HOA. One of my deputies even showed me one of the flyers she'd taped to a lamppost. It read, "Alert! The county sheriff is attempting a hostile takeover of our beloved community. We must unite against this abuse of power. HOA President, Karen Fletcher, I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Lisa, however, was less amused. Mark, she's turning the neighbors against you, she said one evening as we sat on the porch. A few people are starting to believe her. I leaned back, calm as ever. Let them. The truth always wins. Besides, I pointed down the street, where the HOA maintenance truck had just pulled up, its crew about to patch a pothole. They're about to learn who owns that road. The sign 2 days later, I made a phone call to the County Roads Department. They confirmed what Rick had told me earlier, that the stretch of asphalt running through the HOA's main entrance wasn't public property. It wasn't county maintained. It was private. And it belonged entirely to parcel 21B47. My parcel. So with official permission, I installed a simple legal sign right at the start of the HOA entrance. Private road, property of Sheriff Mark Daniels, used by permission only. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't threatening. But oh, did it send a message. By noon that day, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. People stopped to take pictures. Cars slowed to read it. And then came the inevitable storm, Karen's meltdown. Karen's outburst. It was 3:15 p.m. when she marched down the street, fuming, clutching her clipboard like a weapon. She stopped in front of the sign, pointed at it, and shouted, "This is illegal. You can't put that here." I was standing in my yard, arms crossed, trying not to laugh. "Actually," I said, walking toward her, "I can. It's a private road on private property." "This is community land," she snapped. "Not according to the county," I said. "Want to see the paperwork again?" Her face twisted in anger. "You think you can scare me because you're the sheriff?" I smiled. "No, ma'am. I think the facts scare you just fine on their own." She glared at me, muttering something under her breath about abuse of power and lawsuits. Then she turned to the maintenance crew still standing by their truck. "Don't just stand there. Take that sign down." One of the workers, a young guy who looked about 20, shrugged awkwardly. "Ma'am, Sheriff Daniels owns the road. We're not touching it." Karen stomped her foot like a toddler. "You all work for the HOA. I give the orders." The worker shook his head. "Actually, ma'am, I quit." "You're nuts." He threw his gloves in the truck and drove off. The rest of the crew followed. Karen stood there, speechless, as the HOA's maintenance team literally drove away mid-tantrum. The checkpoint now. I wasn't about to block anyone from getting home. I'm not that kind of guy. But when you own property, you have the right to protect it. So that weekend, I had a few deputies, off-duty volunteering, help me install a small security gate at the entrance. Nothing major. Just a simple arm gate with a keypad and sign that said, "Authorized access only." When Karen saw it on Monday morning, she nearly had a stroke. She ran over, waving her clipboard like a flag of war. "You can't restrict access. This is tyranny." "Relax," I said. "Everyone in the neighborhood will get the access code. But before I hand it out, each household has to sign a one-page acknowledgement that this road is private property, and that they agree to follow the usage rules." She gasped. "That's extortion." I chuckled. "No, ma'am. That's property management." The turning point. By midweek, the HOA residents had started lining up outside my house to sign the acknowledgement forms. They were polite, friendly, and judging by their tone, more than ready to see Karen's reign end. "Sheriff," one man said, "I've lived here 10 years. Never had a problem with anyone but her." Another woman whispered, "You're doing us a favor. She's been running this place like a dictatorship." By Friday evening, all but one household had signed. Guess who the holdout was? The showdown at sunset. Karen showed up again, papers in hand, voice shaking with fury. "You can't make me sign that form," she shouted. "You can't make me acknowledge your fake ownership." I raised an eyebrow. "Fake, huh? Want to explain that to the county recorder's office? Or maybe to the judge who signed the deed transfer?" Her voice wavered. I'll take this to court." "Go ahead," I said. "But while you're at it, you might want to ask your lawyer how long your mail and deliveries will take to arrive when the Postal Service stops using this road without authorization." Her jaw dropped. "You wouldn't dare." "Karen," I said with a calm smile, "I don't have to. That's how private property works." For the first time, she had no comeback. She stood there trembling, clutching her clipboard like a shield, then finally muttered, "This isn't over," before storming back home. Lisa came out onto the porch, smirking. "You know, you could have gone easy on her." I laughed. "Oh, that was easy. She hasn't even seen what's next." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "What's next?" I smiled. "Let's just say the HOA's about to learn what happens when the landlord comes to collect." 2 weeks after the road showdown, the neighborhood was quieter than it had ever been. No HOA patrols. No letters taped to doors. No Karen stomping across lawns with her clipboard like a drill sergeant. But I knew it wouldn't last. People like Karen never go down without one last fight. And sure enough, it came one Tuesday morning, disguised as a certified envelope. Inside was a legal notice stamped with the county seal. Subject: complaint for harassment, misuse of authority, and property extortion. Filed by none other than, you guessed it, Karen Fletcher, HOA president. Lisa took one look at the papers and groaned. "She really doesn't quit, does she?" I grinned. "Nope. But this time, she just made my job a lot easier." The county courthouse was packed the day of the hearing. Half the HOA showed up just to watch the fireworks. Some sat on Karen's side, but most sat behind me, quiet, curious, and tired of her antics. Karen strutted in wearing her favorite navy suit, that same binder clutched to her chest like a holy book. She glared at me from across the room. The judge, an old friend of mine, though you wouldn't know it from his poker face, called us to order. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, "you're alleging that Sheriff Daniels used his position to harass you and unlawfully claim property belonging to the HOA. Is that correct?" Karen nodded proudly. "Yes, Your Honor. He's been abusing his badge to intimidate homeowners and install illegal signs on community land." The judge turned to me. "Sheriff, your response?" I stood up calmly and handed over a neatly organized folder. "Your Honor," included our county land records, lease expiration notices, and a letter from the registrar confirming my ownership of the parcel in question. You'll also find a statement from the county surveyor verifying the HOA's clubhouse, pool, and primary access road are all located on my property. Karen's confident smirk evaporated as the judge flipped through the documents. He frowned, then looked up. "Mrs. Fletcher, did you verify this information before filing your complaint?" Karen stammered. I was told by the developer. The developer dissolved 15 years ago," the judge said flatly. "You've been using land you don't own. This complaint has no merit." Her voice rose. "But he put up gates. He's controlling access." The judge sighed. "On his land. That's within his rights." Karen froze, her mouth open but no words coming out. Then came the hammer blow. The judge leaned back. "Mrs. Fletcher, given that you filed this complaint in bad faith, you've wasted this court's time. I'm imposing a $2,000 fine for misuse of legal process, payable within 30 days. You could hear a pin drop. Karen's face turned beet red. That's outrageous." The judge raised an eyebrow. "What's outrageous is ignoring property law for over a decade. Case dismissed." The gavel hit the desk with a crack. And just like that, it was over. The fall of the Queen by that afternoon, word had spread like wildfire. The HOA's once fearless leader had just been publicly embarrassed, fined, humiliated, and legally defeated. But it didn't stop there. The HOA's lawyer, now aware that their entire community was sitting on land they didn't own, immediately called for an emergency vote. The agenda was simple: vote to remove Karen Fletcher as HOA president, effective immediately. The meeting lasted 15 minutes. The vote? Unanimous. When Karen tried to shout her way through the crowd, someone actually stood up and said, "You fined us for hanging Christmas lights, Karen. Sit down." She stormed out in tears, clutching that same clipboard like it could save her. That was the last time anyone saw her in an HOA meeting. The sheriff's proposal the next day, several neighbors came to my door. "Sheriff," one said, "we'd like your help. The HOA's collapsing. Nobody wants to take over. We need someone level-headed, someone fair, to rebuild it." I laughed. "You're asking me to run the HOA? After all this?" They nodded. Lisa came out, coffee in hand, grinning. "You know what? You might actually be the only one who could make that work." I looked at her. You serious? She shrugged. You already enforce laws for the county. What's one more set of rules? I couldn't argue with that logic. So reluctantly, and with a bit of mischief, I agreed. At the next community meeting, they held a quick election. Every hand in the room went up. Unanimous. And just like that, I went from the man Karen tried to destroy to the new HOA president. The new rules my first act as president? I tore up the old rulebook. Literally. We replaced 50 pages of nonsense with 5 simple rules. Respect your neighbors. Maintain your property. No harassment. No fines without cause. Keep the community safe. Enjoy your home. The crowd actually applauded. A few residents even brought out lawn chairs and turned it into a block party. Kids ran around, music played, and people started acting like a community again. For the first time since I moved in, it felt like home. Karen's exit as for Karen. She sold her house 3 weeks later. Word was she'd moved 2 towns over to join another HOA. Lisa smirked when she heard. Think she'll learn her lesson? I chuckled. Karen? No chance. But at least it's not our problem anymore. We clinked our glasses together, watching the sunset over a peaceful, drama-free street. The twist ending a few days later, I got a call from the county office. Sheriff, the clerk said, chuckling, funny story. The HOA from Karen's new neighborhood just called. They were asking for a reference, wanted to know what kind of leader she was. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the phone. Tell them she's passionate. Lisa leaned against me, smiling. You know, this whole thing started because you parked in your own driveway. I nodded. And ended with me running the HOA that tried to fine me for it. She laughed. Only you, Mark. I raised my glass. To good neighbors, and bad ones who move away. Final line for video outro. When the HOA called the cops, they didn't realize they were calling their own landlord, and now they're sheriff.